Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. Seth Cox is on the line, my co-host from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and he's also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, which is particularly pertinent right now as we are going through the draft process, and this is another one of the final of our draft preview shows in terms of players and positions. It's episode 418, but it's not only that. We get to talk about uniforms, which, 46-year-old me, I'm like, uniforms. But I know. Uniforms are a big deal to young people, middle-aged people as well, players. Uniforms matter.
The players are the big ones.
And so we have new uniforms. That happened tonight. We're recording Thursday night, and Thursday night the Cardinals had their event in Phoenix at the Van Buren. Season ticket holders were invited. Media members were invited. I considered going, except I know we had the show to do, so I figured I'll just look at Twitter and then we can talk about it. So we've got new uniforms, and then we've got the last of our positional previews. We're going to talk about the running backs in this draft, the tight ends, and we're not going to talk about all the quarterbacks because the Cardinals are not going to be taking a quarterback early in the draft, but we'll look at perhaps some late-round guys the Cardinals might consider moving forward because you always want to bring quarterbacks in to develop. That's kind of one of the commodities that you need in this league. So let's start. We have new uniforms, which, honestly, my biggest takeaway is they didn't mess them up because that's the one thing. People have been begging for new uniforms, and we've seen other teams do uniforms, and they're like, ew. They're fairly simple, but they're nice. And they didn't mess things up, basically. They didn't try to do too much with them. And I think the fact that this is a team that is slow to do things historically, and they try to tie things in historically, then I think it was a smart move to do. So it's really basic. They have three. They've got a white scheme, they've got a red scheme, and they've got a black scheme. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and the more I read, the more things make sense. And so like the Reds wasn't, on first initial reaction, wasn't a huge fan, but if you dive a little deeper in, you learn that they went with the plain reds, no striping, based on their St. Louis uniforms. So if you go back and look at old St. Louis uniforms, that's what the Reds looked like. But they wanted to make sure that everybody knew it was Arizona, right? So they put the bigger, and that's a Nike thing too. I think people need to understand that Nike does have a part in this. And this is their concept, is that they like to show off the state. So like the Jets new uniforms have the big, I think it's NYJ on the front, or it might just say New York. I'm not.
And honestly, I like the concept. My son, as those of you who, if you know, like I have a 21-year-old son, Diego, big in football fan. He's studying sports business. He might end up working for an NFL team at some point. But he wondered. He was talking about he's part of that generation that loves uniform concepts. That kind of goes over my head, but he was questioning, well, why is the Arizona only on the red? I'm like, because it's their home uniform. That's when they're playing in Arizona. And it gives each uniform, each style, the white, the red, the black, all have something slightly different. And I kind of like that. I do.
Yeah, and that was the thing. I'm big on clean uniforms. And so like that's what these are. These are clean. They didn't go over the top. They didn't try to do too much, and that's the way I like it. We had heard rumors that the whites and blacks would give us Ohio State vibes. They do, but
Yeah,
not in a
more
negative way, right?
right. It's more of kind of for me, it's the sleeve design, the stripes that they have on the sleeves that give me that feel more than anything.
Right, right. And so, and then the Reds, they do have similarities to like Oklahoma, but those are classic uniforms, like some of the most classic uniforms in all of college football.
Yeah.
They're a little brighter red. So I think, people are going to say, "Oh, they didn't do enough. They did too much, blah blah blah." It's just it's a clean look. It's a super upgrade from what they had. Uh, and it was funny. We were texting while they were coming out in them, and I told you my favorite were the whites,
Yeah.
your favorites were the black, and then one of our good friends, Tyler Nickel, was texting me and goes, "My favorites are the reds." So that's what I was saying to people. Like, it's funny because realistically, nobody's gonna like all three. Like, nobody's gonna love all three, I should say.
Right.
But the fact that everybody I've talked to is like, "Oh, I like at least this one," then they did it right, because like there's one for you to choose from if you're an Arizona Cardinals fan, and that's all you need to worry about. Like, you're not going to go buy 3 jerseys. So
No.
so you buy the one you like.
We
and
aren't
you
made of
come
money,
back.
guys. This
Right.
podcast is not a rich podcast.
Right.
But if I were to rank mine, I love the black. I've loved the black alternates. I really like the red, and it's not like I dislike the white. It's just, for me, white uniforms are pretty. I've never loved plain whites. In fact, as an Arizona State fan, of all the different uniform concepts they had, the white is my least favorite. But that's a me thing. I know that lots of people, including players, love a really clean white uniform, and it does look good. It's just not my preferred thing. There's one thing I've had a complaint about. So my opinion on jerseys and uniforms is as little as there is when it came to their black alternates. The first black alternate, I love that look, especially in person. But there was just little tiny lines of red that wasn't visible at all when you watched the players on TV. And so it gave me a vibe like the Cardinals were playing in black and white and everyone else was playing in color. But they're very visible and things like that. Then the Color Rush jerseys came out, and I love how those look. But then for a functional part of it, they've got the red numbering, which I loved. But part of the job of the reporter is sitting in the press box. I can't see the numbers very well because they don't have any outline. The white numbering against the black on the original black alternates, very easy to read. But the red on black without any outlining was hard. And they made that improvement on the alternate blacks this time. And so you've got the red numbering, which I loved from the Color Rush, but they then put, it's what I guess is a silverish outline. It looked white initially when I was looking on my phone, but I guess cut more close, it's kind of a gray silver outline to those numberings, which makes the numbers pop to me, and legible, so that when I'm doing things like charting who's playing, who's making the play, who's on the offense, defensive line, I can tell who that is.
Yeah, and I really like, like I said, the whites are my favorite. They're clean, they're crisp. That's how I like my uniforms. I like the lettering. I like, all of that. It's just a clean look. The blacks and look are, like, if you were to ask me, I'd be like A+ for the whites, A- B+ for the blacks, and I give the reds a C for right now. I'm not a huge fan of just the all red. It's just a little red for me. We saw a mashup concept that somebody much smarter and more talented with computer stuff did on Twitter, and the reds with the white pants look fire. Like they look awesome. So if they come out in those more consistently, I'll like the reds more. The all red is just a lot of red.
It is a
Like
lot of red. And I kind of wish that the NFL would allow them to do something like this, but kind of like how ASU mixes and matches. Imagine this. Imagine the black helmet with the white top and the black pants. I think that would be so nice.
yeah, exactly. So it's just, they did a nice job. They did a really nice job of just like giving themselves a new look.
And
And
there's some hidden things. So, for those of you, like, the hashtag last year, Bird City Football. Okay, I'll get this. When people talked about how people said that Phoenix was Bird City, I'll go with you, Seth. I've lived here my entire life. You know what I've never heard Phoenix referred to as is Bird City. Had you ever heard that before this year?
no.
No. So the idea people were trying to force this Bird City, I'm like, nobody calls Phoenix the Bird City. Yes, a phoenix is a mythical bird. Nobody says that. But and Cardinals fans, over the last decade that we've kind of been in the sports media game, the hashtag Bird Gang was the one that Cardinals fans really latched to, and they are readopting that. They have some neat hidden messages in the insides of the jerseys. They've got Protect the Nest. They've got Bird Gang. I really like those concepts. That's for the artsy part of jerseys.
And I do like the back. I didn't notice it until later on, but the back above the numbers, they have the logo as well.
Yeah. Oh, on the red where they have the white bird. That's cool.
Yeah, it looks. Yeah, that's what I was saying. It looks really nice. And then, I like the Cardinals in the silver. I know people are like silver, but like I like the Cardinals in the silver on the sleeves. I think those look good. So like the whole thing, like I said, I'm a fan. You go back, you go to the Arizona Cardinals Twitter account at AZ Cardinals. They go through all of it, but like the upper back logo in the black is a straight red bird. Like it looks fantastic. The white one has the more normal looking cardinal with the yellow beak, which looks great. And then, like you said, the red one has the all white. So like they did something different in each of them too, like little things that you may not have noticed, but like having the obviously the team's logo, but all colored differently in every single jersey. That's something that's a unique and cool thing that they did.
The gray face mask is a nice addition to the helmet. The decal, the Cardinals decal is shinier.
Well, and it's now 3D, so that was their big thing. So it's like a larger enhanced 3D, so you get some different shading, which makes the back end pop out almost like it's coming out of the helmet. And then they added the silver flakes in the helmet, which is a big thing. It's funny. People don't get this, but I have high school kids. I have I have kids in youth football. The helmet thing, the jersey thing, all of it matters. It legitimately matters to them.
It really does. I've heard about college kids.
Yeah, they love it.
And they make decisions about where they go to school for football on the jersey alone sometimes.
Right. And if they're fortunate enough to have that choice, yeah. And so like that's the thing, is you look at it, I think they did a really nice job of like giving people options. That's why I said not everybody's gonna like all three or love all three, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But like, going in, looking at them on all three, they're clean. They look clean, and that's a big thing. So, I'm excited about it. I'm excited to see how it all, plays out as we get through there. But it's a definite upgrade. That's all you can really that's the biggest thing you can say over anything else, right?
And at least one thing there's one more thing we don't have to listen to fans about reading in the on the press conference chats, on Reddit, on Twitter. Nobody should be asking for new uniforms at least for another decade. And who knows if we're still in the business then? So we won't have to deal with asking those questions or anything like that. So coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, we move on to the draft preview part of the show, where we're starting with the running back position. We've got three positions: running back, tight end, and quarterback. We're going to go from most significant need to down to the least significant. So we'll start by talking about the running backs. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. We're at the draft preview part of our show. This is the fourth one of our positional previews. Coming up, next week, we'll have our mock draft before the draft itself. Let's talk about the running backs. There are the one running back, the one running back to rule them all we know is Bijan Robinson out of Texas, who is also an Arizona high school product, that's cool. Cardinals will not be, I don't think. That's the one thing we have. There's been a lot of players connected to the Cardinals. Bijan Robinson is not one of them. But where do you think Bijan ultimately is going to get drafted? And then number two, will he be the only running back to go in round one?
Yeah, I think to answer your second question first, yes, I think he will be. He is one of the best running back prospects we've seen in the last forever. I've been fortunate enough. I mean, I know you live here, but I was covering high school football when he was playing high school football, and he and Keely Ringo are two of literally the best players I've ever seen on the field at any level. It was, I mean, Bijan has grown roughly like an inch and like 10 pounds since he left high school. Like,
and didn't he play corner at a really high level as well in high school?
Yeah, he played both ways. So that was the thing, is like he was just such a talent. And like what's crazy about him is you go through it, and one of the things Justin and I talk about all the time with the podcast is like you look at their yards per attempt, and like if they're going to be like generational, they should be averaging over 6 yards per carry. And Bijan was 8.1, 5.8, and then in his most usage ever, 6.1. So it was like all this kid did was run for 6 yards, over 6 yards per carry for his career. Get better every season. Started being able to hang on, or started to be able to catch the ball more consistently out of the backfield. He's just a dynamic player. If the Cardinals were in a different situation, like trading back and taking him at 7 or 11 would make a lot of sense, but they just have so many needs that you look at a guy like Bijan, he's fantastic, but taking him in the first round would kind of be irresponsible team building.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Do you think, though, I see on ESPN, I hear things, and what you guys have said on the podcast is a little different. Generational talent. Is he on the same level as guys like Derrick Henry, Adrian Peterson, Saquon, a healthy Saquon, and more recently Jonathan Taylor? He doesn't have the long speed that either Taylor or Saquon had.
No, I think he's actually more in line with like a Zeke Elliott. And Zeke went 4th overall, as we know, and then was a 2-time, 3-time All-Pro. Led the league in rushing a couple times. I mean, he was just a man amongst boys, until it catches up to you. So it's one of those situations where you look at it and you just kind of figure out. I mean, think about Zeke's rookie year. He had over 1,600 yards rushing, and remember that's back when there was only 16 games. So, and he only played in 15, by the way. So, 1,600 yards rushing, 15 touchdowns. You look at his yards from scrimmage, his first 5 years, I think it is. Yeah, Zeke had 1,900 yards, 1,200 yards in 10 games, over 2,000 yards, 1,700 yards, and then over 1,300 yards in 15 games. Like he was just a bell cow and a complete force. The question in the whole thing with running backs becomes what is their longevity? It's something you and I've talked about on the show, right? Like draft running backs every couple of years, use them for 4 years, and then draft
and
new
let
ones.
someone else pay him.
Right.
As bad as that sounds, let another team pay that back. David Johnson, after he got paid, we've seen it basically every single running back. Even Christian McCaffrey, after he got paid, still producing at a super high level, but the durability has been a concern. It's just when he plays, he's great,
right?
But he does miss a lot of time.
And even Zeke, Zeke got paid, and then you look at after he got paid, he had 1,000-yard season again, and it's just like the amount of touches that they get, it just becomes really difficult. I've said the big thing with Robinson, the reason he is so great, what makes him so special, is obviously the balance, the running ability, and things like that. But he doesn't take big hits. Like if you watch him, he's able to kind of soften the blow when he's running, and that's why I think for the first contract, for what the team like the Eagles or the Falcons that we're hearing might take him, in the top 10. It makes sense because like you're going to get 5 great years out of him, and then you're going to have to make a decision and be cautious with it. But if you're close, especially like the Eagles, right, and you get a guy that can be a straight up bell cow, be on the field all 3 downs, do everything in the game, be a guy similar to, like you're saying, like a Derek, like obviously not stylistically, but be a guy like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Zeke Elliott, like be one of those guys, which he has that ability, then you take it and you ride it, like I said, for 5 years, and then after 5 years you got to make a decision. But in those 5 years you're going to see excellence and greatness.
Yeah. Going on, are there any running backs worth looking at in round 2?
It's interesting because I love Jahmyr Gibbs. He's running back 2 with a bullet. Like he's fantastic.
And he's the one back that I've heard anything like mock draft, anything connected to the Cardinals that early.
Right. And the problem with Jahmyr Gibbs is he's a little small. 5'9", we'll call it 200, 199, 200. It literally doesn't make a difference.
Which is basically Chase Edmonds size.
Yeah. But, and his high-end comp is so high. It's one of those things that you don't even like to talk about because it's almost unrealistic to expect him to get there. But it's kind of –
he said the same thing. Honest, that's what Keim said about Chase Edmonds, like his physical comp. They wouldn't even say who it was.
Right. And so his is Jamal Charles.
Oh, my gosh.
and it's crazy to look at. So, like, you look at Gibbs, right? Charles was an inch and a half taller, but like 5'11", 200 pounds. But you look at some similarities, arm length for Gibbs, 30 and a half. Arm length for Charles was 31 and a half. Hand size 9 1/8, hand size 9 1/4. 4.36 for Gibbs, 4.38 for Charles. And then their verticals you look at and you're like, that's not impressive. Charles' vertical was 30 and a half, which is not good for running backs. Gibbs was 33 and a half, which is, below average in running backs, but it's their explosiveness and ability to put their foot in the ground and change directions. But that's what I said. That's his high end. I think he's more realistically, and again, this is still super high end, and this guy went in the second round, and we have to like remember the player, not the person. and that's Ray Rice. So Ray Rice came out of Rutgers, you know. Um, he came out at 5'8", 199. Holy cow, that's almost the same, right? He ran a 4.42, so a little slower, 31 and a half inch vert, a little less. So you look at it, you know,
But he
he
was
was
really good.
and he was fantastic until the off the field
Right,
stuff,
right.
you know.
Don't go punching people in an elevator.
Right. Well, people or especially ladies.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but so, and we know that. I mean, I shouldn't say we know, but we have never heard anything negative about Gibbs in that way. So, you know, if that's his likely outcome, his high end is, you know, Jamal Charles, who was a borderline Hall of Famer, and then his low end is a guy that you look at and you're like, oh, this guy, you know, he wasn't he wasn't bad. He was a good back, you know, but he was a little undersized and never. And by the way, drafted way too early, so he just never lived up to the hype. But like a Felix Jones, you remember Jones in Dallas,
Yes.
and you know, just never. And again, drafted in the first round, 22nd overall, shouldn't have been. And then just never really lived up to the hype. Had one really nice season his second year as the like lead backup, averaged almost 6 yards a carry, and then once they asked him to start kind of being the guy, he wasn't able to do it consistently. But and so that's the thing. I don't think I think Gibbs is uh, foolproof, but again, can you risk 34 on him? Now
Right.
let
Especially when there's other positions that don't. Let's be honest. I think the running back position is, while like great players, not so many. But I think throughout, especially at the running back position, you can get productive players throughout. While after round two, your offensive line talent diminishes greatly.
correct, and I think that's absolutely right. And I think, you know, you look at it, that this draft really tells that story, you know. And so we can play the what if game, right? What if they trade back and they end up with a, you know, another second pick? I would still prefer to see them use it on what we call premium positions, right? Like
Correct.
either a pass rusher if they didn't draft one in the first round, or a corner, or an offensive lineman, right? Like one of
Yes.
those three. But you know, Gibbs is a guy that I wouldn't.
You wouldn't hate.
Right, I wouldn't hate. Um,
The third
eh,
round though is kind of where, for me, it looks like the sweet spot, isn't it?
right, yeah, and there's a lot of interesting guys. I mean, and it really becomes a pick your flavor
Yeah.
type of thing, and
There's
that's what makes it.
the three
Go ahead.
guys, the three or four guys, names that really pop for me. Zach Charbonnet. I know he's a guy that Justin really likes over there on your show. Who's the other? Kendra Miller, TCU. Dwayne McBride, UAB. I don't know if he'll go as high as round three, but could. And then
Yeah,
then the talk of all the offseason, the combine and the Senior Bowl was Tyjae Spears.
right, and so you look at a couple of the guys. So we'll start, you know, Charbonnet. Um, I comped him, you know, to a guy that came out of ASU last year in Rashad White, right? Like a guy that was drafted in the third round, is going to get the chance to be a lead back this year. You know, you look at him, has everything you want. 6 foot, just under 6'1", 214 pounds, ran a 4.53, has good vertical, good broad jump, really, really solid all around
Can catch the
athlete.
ball.
Catch and that's what makes me recall Rashad White, right? Like, you know, and people thought Rashad was bigger, but he's literally the same size, 6 foot 214. He was a little bit faster, 4.48, but like, you know, they're really, I think they're very similar players, and you can utilize him in the same way. Um, you know, Kendre Miller is an interesting one because you're talking probably, I would guess, and again, we won't know until draft night if there's a run on running backs, but I would guess you would take him closer to like 96,
Right.
in that range, as well as Dwayne McBride. I think both those guys are really good players. Uh, Miller's an interesting one because obviously with the injury we didn't get any testing numbers, right? So you're really going off of
Just
uh,
on tape, really.
yeah, you're really going off the tape. He came in 5'11", 215. That's exactly where you want him to be as a guy that's, a really between the tackles type of guy. Um, and, he was the complimentary guy to Zach Evans, who's a guy I really like. But then came this year and he got the bulk of the carries. And again, one of the things that we talk about a lot is that's 6 yards per carry, right? Um, he was at 7.3 again as I up 7.3 and then 7.5. This year is the main guy, 6.2. Exactly what you want to see, the growth. Doesn't catch the balls a lot out of the backfield. So that's one of the things that I would say you would have to see if he can do. I'm never going to say guys can't do it just because they weren't asked to do it.
Right. That's the one thing is like, can they? Because right, that's one thing they said about Jonathan Taylor, right? And
Right.
his hands are fine.
Right. And a guy he reminds me of, and that's not a special athlete. So, when you don't get testing numbers, you got to be really careful when you go into comps with guys because you don't want to over comp somebody. You don't want to be like, oh, this guy is the next you know, high end guy, and then you quote some great testing numbers, but this guy's really like a low 4.5 or high 4.5, low 4.6 type of guy, right? And so, and I don't mean this to come off as negative. I think this guy's a really good back, but he reminds me a lot of like Tyler Algier coming out last year. And you and I both liked Algier a lot coming out of BYU.
Right, but no one was going to draft him before. No one's drafted him before day 3.
Right. And so if you can get so if you can get Miller and at that 96 pick, that would be, that would be a fit. I don't was McBride hurt as well? Do you know?
I don't remember that. I know that he probably didn't want to be tested because he is an analytical workhorse, but he doesn't do anything particularly flashy other than just produce. From what I let me see.
Yeah, he did not participate in pro day. Oh, okay. He did have a hamstring injury. Okay, so at least we got that. So again, he's a bigger guy. I mean, weight wise, he's the same. 215, but he came in at 6'2", right?
No, 5'10",
or
5'10",
5'10". Oh, this is wrong. Perfect. Yeah, so 5'10" and a fourth. Okay, and then he came in at 209. I wonder who they have there. That's the wrong stuff. But you look at him, I really like him a lot. Like you said, the question with McBride is going to be where, because he's a guy that's run the ball probably about 9,000 times already.
Yes.
And I'm exaggerating, but he's had over 400 carries the last 2 years.
If I take someone, without knowing the testing, that's kind of Stephon Taylor like, right? He was an absolute workhorse at Stanford.
And so, McBride comps out well to like guys like Spencer Ware, who had a nice career, Tashard Choice, who had a nice career. So it'll be interesting. He's another guy that you're just going to have to find out if he can catch the ball. I mean, he has 5 career catches,
and he was never asked to do it.
No.
So
and so again, we're just stating a fact. We're saying like you got to find out if it's something he can do. But he can run in a zone or a man scheme, which is really nice. Nowadays more than any in the spread offenses, you got to find guys. You have to find guys that do well at each. And so, he's a guy that does that. And so I like him. A couple, you mentioned Tyjae Spears. One of the big knocks on him, if you will, is just going to be obviously the size, but it's the fact that he's been nicked up throughout his career.
And running back is a position where it's really easy.
Right. And so, like, you look at it, this was the first year over 200 carries. Again, averaged almost 7 yards per carry for his career, and he put up massive numbers. You know, one of the comps you get for him that I like is Justice Hill, the guy in Baltimore, who's been a great, change of pace back, a great third down back, a guy that can do a lot of different things, um, out of the backfield, for the Ravens, and he was a guy that he got drafted in the fourth round, which is again what we're talking about, that 96 to I think it's 104, 105, whatever it is, for Cardinals. That would be a fit for them because he is a two-way player, right? Like he's a super athlete. He did not run the 40, I don't think, but he did everything else and he tested out extremely well. Um, a couple of day three guys I really like that I think are really intriguing. The first one is Sean Tucker out of Syracuse. This dude is lightning fast. Uh, and so I'm excited to see what he where he goes because he's a guy that allegedly was like a mid to low 4.3 guy. So you're talking about a guy that's a one cut downhill runner. The problem with these guys, and
That's
something that
weird.
we've talked
Was
about.
it? Did he do it, or is this an estimated one? 4.54.
No, he. I have not seen that he did anything yet because he was going to test in. Uh, he's going to have his pro day on April 24th.
Oh, jeez.
So because he just got cleared, so
Okay.
this is yeah. So this is the problem with these guys. So like and it explains the comp really well. So fast and athletic, but they're also like kind of so what we talked about with Bean, right? He's got all the tools in the toolbox, but then he's also really good at not taking big hits. Sean Tucker's not. And so you get like a guy like a Raheem Mostert, right, who's fast as can be, but can't stay on the field. But if you're talking about a guy in the fourth, fifth round, I I like it quite a bit in that range. Mostert, I think, went undrafted
It
coming
was
out
either
of
undrafted or seventh
Purdue,
round, but
but he's carved out a really nice niche
yes.
for himself and been a really good back. But again, you're just talking about a guy that's again he you're gonna have to put up with him missing 3, 4, 5 games a year.
Oh,
Just go ahead.
now I was going to ask a couple of guys that I think might be in the at least one of them in the third round range is Tank Bigsman. He's one of the guys that the Cardinals actually brought in Auburn, and then in the Kuiper McShay mock draft that came out this week, it's the other Texas back, Roshan Johnson.
Yeah, Roshan's an interesting one.
He's another big dude.
He's huge. I get that's the
6 foot
first
two
thing.
nineteen. So
Yeah,
it's
so
kind of
he's
like the Keontae Ingram and James Conner mold.
right, and he never got a ton of run, obviously, because he was behind Bijan Robinson, who was a borderline, Heisman type of guy. Uh, so you look at Roshan. He's a guy that uh, is a power guy, right? He's a between the tackle guy. He does a really nice job um, getting that extra yard. He actually comps out fairly similar to like James Conner, and so like that's a he's obviously Connor came in at 233, so he he's a different beast altogether. But similar in terms of style and work. Um, when you play with Bijan, you don't really get to catch the ball either,
Nope.
right? So like He did have 14 catches this year, so it's something he does well. But I think his early usage will be as a short yardage guy, like that. But he is a
And that would target him more towards like where the Cardinals got Ingram, right? So 6 this round.
I've heard that teams are going to like him in the third or fourth.
That's what like the Kuiper McShay one had. That's really interesting, especially doesn't have the traits. Because where did Kenyon Drake get drafted? I don't remember, but because he kind of had the same type of situation, being the backup there at Alabama, but he at least had different traits in the fact that he was a burner speed wise.
Third round, so he went 73 overall.
I remember you guys talking about Drake on the old Draft Breakdown podcast.
Right, and it's one of those things, like, you gotta, like, they're good players. You just have to be really careful when you take a backup, because you don't know how they hold up to, running the ball or getting all the carries. When they're able to be spared, so to speak, it makes it more difficult. Bigsby's a guy, he came in just a shade under 6 foot, but he's 210 pounds. So, great size. Testing numbers were average across the board, which for a running back is fine. I think that's one of the big things now, is that people get caught up in like these athletic testings for running backs, where it's like, look, their vision and ability to like get in.
And there's a reason why running backs tend to be slightly less athletic than other positions.
Right, exactly.
It's not a premium position. And so your better athletes, you get put at receiver and corner, and then the defensive backfield to be able to do that. When a running back, yeah, sure, if you can run the ball fast, but there's other things to do that. But that's probably one of the reasons why those type of numbers are average.
Right, exactly. And so you look at him, he's a guy that's gonna, again, is great at getting one cut and getting up the field. Something he does really well. Again, another guy that thrives between the tackles, does it consistently and is able to win. He's one of the guys that runs best out of the zone, or zone blocking. So that's one of the things that'll be interesting, again, to see how that plays into things for him. He's a guy that, so when we talk about the 6 yards per carry, one of the things that I want to specify is, like, it doesn't mean don't draft somebody if they're under 6 yards per carry. It just means that, like, if you're going to spend a top 50-ish, let's just say top 2 round pick on a guy, they should be over that, because they should be good enough to have created. Bigsby's at 5.5, which is fine. It really is fine for the garbage he was playing with at Auburn those couple years. They just weren't the old Auburn, right? I mean, hell, they brought in Cadillac Williams to coach the team. Like it was not good. His 3 years, he had 3 coaches there. So Bigsby's a guy, I think he's going to be good. The question with Bigsby and the question with a lot of these running backs is, like, can they get their work in without the buildup? That's one of the things we've seen with James Conner, right? Is like Conner and Roshan Johnson's the same way, and Bigsby's kind of the same way, and that goes with their size, right? They're guys that need 20 carries to get to 80 yards, if that makes sense. Like, because their first 12 or 15,
they're going to get 2 yards, 2 yards, 2 yards,
yeah,
3 yards, and then you're going to get the 15 on like carry number 12 and 13.
Right, and that's so they're guys, and I would even say I would guess Kendre Miller is similar to that. So that's the question with these guys. Are you getting a guy that needs too much, too many carries to be effective early? Because like you said, if you're taking them in the third, especially at like 64, whatever, 65, 66, they better be guys that can come in and contribute immediately. Whereas if you're taking them a little later, 96 or potentially on day 3, then that's kind of what you're more looking for, right? Is a guy that can eventually replace your main guy. But this is a great class to need a running back because there's just so many different types to choose from. One late round guy that I really want to at least throw his name out there, Evan Hull. Um, I talked to Justin about him, and I was like, why did he come out? He still had a year of eligibility. And Justin's like, well, when you play for Northwestern and you go up and down, like they do every year, you just kind of, once you're graduated, go ahead and get out of it because you're gonna be worn down. And Hole is a really good two-way back. He had 54 receptions this year, 33 last year. So he's a guy that catches the ball out of the backfield really nicely. Um, he tested out really
Right.
really well. So when you look at Evan Hull, he's a guy at 5'10", 210, ran a 4.47, great jumps, really good 3-cone. So like he's a guy that you can come in and you can get some really nice kind of as a change of pace back, and a guy that has shown he doesn't need 25 carries to get the most out of him, especially as a guy with the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He reminds me of a guy that was in Tennessee. I believe he was. I just want to make sure. But Darrington Evans, I believe he's the backup in Tennessee.
I remember.
Yeah, yes, he was.
Did
Okay.
he go to Northwestern too?
Appalachian State.
Oh,
and he went, and he went in the 3rd round. So he went a little earlier than Hull probably will, but like a nice receiving back, some good ability. I like him. But with Hull, you're probably talking like round 5, maybe even 6, which is, again, with the needs the Cardinals have, a Bijan or a Gibbs would be fantastic. But I just don't know if you can allot that right now.
Right. Coming up next on the Rise Up C Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's talk about a pretty decent tight end class. That's coming up next on Rise Up C Red. We're back on the Rise Up C Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. The tight end position is an interesting one for the Cardinals because they got Zach Ertz, and they used a 2nd-round pick on
Trey McBride.
Trey McBride. Oh my gosh, I totally blanked on his name. And so you don't feel like tight end is going to be a priority or one that they would necessarily target. And like I've seen a couple of times where a tight end is mocked to him in the 2nd round. I'm like, I don't know if they're going to do that. That said, the tight end class is pretty decent. And I know Daniel Jeremiah during the combine said when they were doing their workouts that he thought as many as 4 could be drafted in the 1st round. I don't think that's going to happen. But what, maybe 2?
Maybe 2. Yeah, maybe 2. A couple of these guys came back down to earth after Jeremiah really pumped them up. But you've got the top 2 guys. Michael Mayer is number 1 with the bullet. I've said all along, he reminds me a lot of Jason Witten, right?
Yeah,
like
and there's nothing he does spectacularly, but he does everything well.
Right, and so and obviously right now he's fast enough. He's not Jason Witten at the end of his career, but
well, and it's important, especially for those that are kind of poo-pooing like some of the his skill set. He entered Notre Dame as the guy as a freshman, right?
Right, and all he did was put up numbers with bad quarterbacks for 3 straight years. I mean, think about this. The dude that had, as a freshman, like you said, 450 yards on 42 catches. And then as a sophomore had 840 yards on 71 catches with 7 touchdowns. And then last year, when everybody knew he was their only offensive weapon, he had 809 yards on 67 catches, over 12 yards per catch, and 9 touchdowns. Like, he's just a guy that understands how to get open. He understands how to play the position. He's fantastic. If he was there at 34, like, you could tell me that they drafted him, I'd be like, that's They drafted a great football player. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be mad about it, but I don't think he gets past the Bengals. That'd be the latest I could see him go. But yeah, he's number one with a bullet. Dalton Kincaid's a guy that a lot of people like.
A lot of people like him more than Mayer.
Right. So he's a guy, I think he's a little older, which, is fine. He's a little smaller. We don't have testing numbers because he's got a bad back. And so that's my first thing.
That's
is
great.
like, yeah. So he's sub 6'4", but he came in at 246, which is fine. Short arms, but big hands. So, and he's a move tight end more. He kind of is in the mold of Trey. Like
Trey, and the comp that a lot of people have said is kind of like a younger Zach Ertz.
Dude, and I've seen that. Ertz came in at 6'5", so he was almost 2 inches taller.
Well, maybe that's more like skill.
Style, yeah, stylistically.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but like it's hard to make up for size, right? Like and so that's why I like, and so we like Trey, and so it's not a negative in any way, and Trey came in about the same size, under 6'4", 246 pounds. Arm length isn't great, but big hands, and he catches the ball well. And so that's the thing. He's a move piece. Here's the thing. I don't think you can have two of those guys. You know what I'm saying? Like, you need somebody that is an ultra competitive and aggressive blocker, and that's not Kincaid's forte. It's not what Trey does best either. So,
Steve Keim views him as a Max Williams type player, which is interesting.
Yeah, and he could be eventually, but in his first year, it wasn't his strong point. In fact, there were
so many blocking miscues.
Yeah, which is fine. Again, rookies, and also understand your player's strengths. Like, that wasn't, and to be fair, they weren't planning on having to use him, but between Max and Zach both getting hurt, then all of a sudden he's got to play a ton of snaps, right? and
he is a better option than Steven Anderson.
Right, 100%. My favorite tight end in this class, a guy I love, and it's super easy to compare him to his cohorts from Iowa, but Sam Laporta. I just love this kid. If he was if they can trade back, address something at 7 or 11, whatever, and then add an extra second round pick, and you get two guys with that pick in the third round at 66. If you took Sam Laporta, again, a little bit smaller, but he comes from Iowa, so this kid has to block, right? Like, that's what they do at Iowa.
Well, and like him about this way, George Kittle, he didn't produce anything in college, really.
Right. And so, and you look at what Laporta had to deal with at quarterback. He's a hard worker. He's an uber athlete, 4.59 40. Great jumps, great 3-cone and short shuttle. I love the kid. I think he's going to be a fantastic player. Like I said, you could talk me into him. And then from there, it just becomes like, who do you like in certain rounds? Where do you like guys, and what are you looking for? We talked about the top guys. Luke Musgrave, I'm interested to see where he goes. He's a guy that is another kind of, he's a bigger guy. He's 6'6", 253, but he plays, to me, similar to like Cole Kmet coming out of Notre Dame, and Kmet went pretty early, didn't he?
I think he was around 2, right, didn't he?
Yeah, and so I could see Musgrave going in round 2. Yeah, good call back, Jess. He went round 2, and he's turned into a really, really solid receiving option for the Bears. I like Musgrave, but I don't think I'm ready to make a play that early. Obviously, Darnell Washington is
giant, hell of a blocker with some upside with his hands. Like, he might have the, like, if you're looking at tight end value, depending where he goes, he just didn't get used as a receiver in Georgia because he just blocked so well.
Right, and that's the thing is like you get comps like Brandon Pettigrew, who was a guy that was in the league forever as a blocking tight end. Mercedes Lewis, same thing, right? Um, if you get a guy like that, then that's fantastic. He's a freak. On top of that, obviously size. We know almost 6'7",
His
264 pounds.
arms and hands, holy
Yeah,
cow,
yeah,
11-inch hands.
Yes, 83 and almost 84-inch wingspan and 11-inch hands. But he ran a 4.64 40 and had a 122-inch broad jump, which is the 86th percentile. And then he had a 4.08 short shuttle, which is 97th percentile. Like, this is a dude that can move.
And
But
the
he is
sled, the blocking drill that they did at the combine, it was like hot butter. The
right.
leverage that he had, like as big as he is, the leverage he was able to get and just move that sled with no problem at all.
Yeah, and so that's the biggest thing is like if you can get him at 66, that's a great value. I don't know if it's a great value because you're talking about basically, and this is not a negative. I don't want anybody to think of this as a negative, but you're basically being like, hey, we're running, a 3 tackle set on almost every play. Um, so by the way, if they're going to mimic some of the things Tennessee and Cleveland did, that's something that they did there, right? Like that's something that they have good blocking tight ends. So it'll be something that's important to see them out there. So, he's obviously the name of like the best blocking tight end, but there are other guys that are good blockers that could be had on day 3. And day 3 is where it would start to make a lot of sense, right? Obviously, if you
isn't the kind of the guy that would be really fun to get in day 3 is the kid out of Old Dominion, Zach Kuntz.
Yeah. So Zach Kuntz was a Penn State guy, and then transferred to Old Dominion, and he's a unique guy because you really just don't see guys this big move like this. So we talked about Blake Freeland the other day, the BYU tackle, right? Kuntz is basically that guy as a tight end, just a shade under 6'7", but 255 pounds. Good arm length, 34-inch. Ran a 4.55 40 with a 40-inch vertical and a 128-inch broad jump.
6.873 cone. Holy crap.
And then his 3 cone and short shuttle were elite. And then you got to remember too, like those long arms, he put up 23 reps on the bench. So so this is what I want people to understand about his jumps though. His jumps comparative to all athletes, his verticals in the 95th percentile, his broad jumps in the 93rd percentile, and then like you said, his shuttle times in the 86th percentile. So this is a guy that is a freak athlete. Here's the thing, he's a good run blocker, obviously a matchup nightmare at 6'7". He's a developmental guy, and the reason why is because he didn't dominate at Old Dominion like you would hope. Last year he had a really solid year, 73 receptions, 692 yards, little less than you would want, 10 yards per catch, with 5 touchdowns. This year he was on pace to do a lot better. 12 receptions for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns, 12 yards per catch, and then he got hurt. So so he only played 5 games. So you look at it, he's a guy that, and Old Dominion is D1, it's not FCS anymore. So you worry about, you're drafting for traits specifically. And that's why, in round 4 or 5, you take a guy with these traits, with this frame, with his size, and he is a good blocker. Like that's a thing. He's a good blocker. He's just not overly physical when it comes to catching the football, which is disappointing. He's kind of baby birdish right now, where like somebody hits him low and he goes down. He doesn't understand how to run through contact yet, despite being bigger, faster, and stronger than everybody he goes against. But if you trust your coaches, and you have tight ends in house, which the Cardinals do, then maybe you can wait on him and get him, like I said, on day 3, and you bring him in. He's a guy that I think would be a great, like you said, a great developmental, a great traits-based pick.
Especially if he can play special teams.
Right, which you would assume with those athletic testing numbers he would be able to do. The question it comes down to is just about him his desire of physicality. And it's not that he's soft or anything like that, but the reality is he just doesn't understand how to use his physical tools yet. Like he should. Like a guy that's that size should be able to physically dominate, and he just isn't there yet.
Who else is there worth looking at on day 3?
After Kuntz, it gets a little less interesting. Josh Wiley's a guy out of Cincinnati that is a very solid blocking tight end. You know, obviously after that team kind of came apart, he wasn't utilized nearly as much uh, in the passing game or as effective in the passing game. So you look at his numbers in 2020 and 2021 playing with Desmond Ritter, obviously. He put up over 12 yards per reception this year and 6 touchdowns in each season. Only 330 yards, 350 yards in those 2 seasons, but that's fine. I mean, you're talking about a fourth option, right? You're not talking about a 1 or a 2 like Mayer or those guys. But this year he dropped down 326, which was fine, but he had a career high in catches in 300 or in 32, but he only had 3 touchdowns. So he's a guy that just, you look at the frame, he's just under 6'7", but he's a little leaner, 250. Had good times, decent jumps, average jumps, which are fine for a tight end, but he's a good blocker. The question becomes on him. He's lean, like I said, 6'7", 250. So he's built more like a small forward than a power forward right now. But he has really, really short arms, like 31.5-inch arms. And at 6'7", you do wonder if that's going to be an issue as an inline tight end being asked to
like
block
his
consistently.
wingspan, like he's almost 6'7", and his wingspan is, what is it, 6'4" and a half, like 6'5".
Yeah. So that you do wonder if that could be an issue. But that's why, again, if you take him on day 3 and he's more of a 5th or 6th round guy,
Right.
but he can block. Like that's the thing, is he has shown on film he can block. Guys we talked about earlier, especially like a Kincaid, they're not blockers. A Kuntz is a willing blocker. He's not a great blocker right now. Even guys that like a Luke Musgrave, or even Sam Laporta aren't as physical blockers as Wiley, but I genuinely do wonder about the arm length.
What about Tucker Kraft? He's a guy that we just
I've heard
we just heard that he was one of their top 30s.
Yeah, and I've heard that he's going to go in the 2nd or 3rd round. Which,
wow!
To me, that's I wouldn't be interested.
Oh,
and I like him quite a bit. I think he's a really intriguing prospect. Another guy that I think he got injured this year. Double checking my notes here. Yeah, he didn't play much this year at South Dakota State. Who actually, I believe, won the FCS championship this year, if I remember right. And they do a really good job of producing tight ends. Obviously, Dallas Goedert coming out of there as well. He's a really intriguing guy. Kraft came in at 6'5", 254, 4.69 40. Really good broad jump, good 3-cone and short shuttle, good on the bench. Like basically, he checks all the boxes. And then you look at his production as a sophomore. He put up 770 yards and 6 touchdowns. This year he was on pace again to be have a better season. In half the snaps, he put up 27 catches for 348 yards. So he's averaging almost 13 yards per catch and 3 touchdowns, but he just, got hurt. And that's a tough thing coming out of a small school, making the jump as an underclassman from the small schools ballsy too, right? Like you didn't play a ton. So it'll be interesting, but he's a good willing blocker. He just needs to get a little more savvy with what he's doing, but he's a guy I like. I'm not interested in my first, obviously
Right.
first 66 picks. Like obviously the Cardinals don't have first 66, but 66 or less. Like even if you have multiple second round picks, Kraft is not a guy that I would take. Now, let me
premium
say,
picks. It's just that it's a premium packs with the round 1 and round 2. You have to feel like you get them, one, because of the importance of the position, and two, just the talent in the class.
right. And so and let me say this: if they were to draft Tucker Kraft in the second round, I'm not going to complain at all. But I'm just saying that wouldn't be what I would do. But I think he does have upside. I think he does have ability. And I think he is a very good player, that offers a lot and would fill an immediate need for the Cardinals based on, when Zach Ertz is going to be back.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Series podcast with Star Cardinals Talk on the web, the final position we're going to discuss, it is the quarterback position. That's coming up next on Rise Up C Red. We're back on the Rise Up C Red podcast, the best Star Cardinals Talk on the web. The quarterback position is one we won't go. This is going to be more of the deep dive because the top 5 quarterbacks that both you and Justin have. So Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and even Hendon Hooker. None of those are even guys that the Cardinals even consider. They're not in that position. They've committed to Kyler Murray. There's no reason to even discuss them. Those are always guys that are going to be drafted. 4 of those are going in the first round. It might go in the top 10, or according to some mock drafts, we're going the top 5. Hooker is going to go somewhere round 1, round 2. It's everything after that. And honestly, let's be honest, the Cardinals shouldn't touch the quarterback position before day 3, and likely late day 3. Like, they don't have a 7th round pick, but sure, a compensatory, like, if you're looking to develop someone, that's kind of what you want to do. But the name that came up, and I don't know, maybe this was just agent talk, the Cardinals like Stanford's Tanner McKee, which I've seen him. Okay, I will say this, that he ranks on the mock draft simulations I run. He's always kind of at the top of the big board around round 3, and I don't want to draft a quarterback at that point, right?
Yeah, that's how I am. And we've seen McKee mocked as high as like early 2nd. I don't think the Cardinals take a quarterback until day 3.
Right. It doesn't make any sense at all.
If McKee is the guy on day 3, that's fine. It's still a little interesting when you're talking about a guy that's basically a statue in the pocket.
Right. Like he's a throwback, like he's not doing anything. Like he's got heavy feet. And his passing production, if you look at kind of the numbers in the Pac-12, it's kind of pedestrian, right?
Yeah, very pedestrian. Turns the ball over a lot, which is interesting. And then he takes a ton of sacks, which is, again, really interesting when you're talking about a quarterback that, to back up your quarterback who's very athletic with an offensive line that may not be very good in year 1, right?
He reminds me physically of saying like throwback Andrew Walter, but without the production.
Yeah, and so you look at it, he's a guy that, has, like you said, his production is not great. He, and people might say, well, what do you mean? He only threw 7 interceptions his sophomore year, and then 8 this year's junior year. But it's like, yeah, but he only threw 15 touchdowns his sophomore year and 13 this year. And I get it, Stanford's bad. Like they were bad. It is what it is. But it's tough to separate a player when he's the guy trying to drive the engine, drive the car in that, so to speak. So, I I don't understand it at all. But like you said, maybe it's agent speak. Who knows what it boils down to? But it's an interesting fit nonetheless.
Who are the quarterbacks worth taking? I think the one that has a lot of fans super intrigued is DTR out of UCLA, Dorian Thompson Robinson, because of the combination of athletic traits that he has, and especially in the NFL, we're having a two-way quarterback, a dual threat quarterback. There's about, even if if you look at some of the numbers, that maybe a running quarterback isn't great because they get hurt so often, but having that dual threat, at least the ability to make plays with their legs, is very cool.
Yeah, and I love DTR. I think he'd be a great fit as a long term backup. Interesting because he definitely bulked up during
What
the
was
offseason.
what was his playing weight?
So I think he plays in the 190s.
Yeah, he measured. He weighed 203 at the combine.
Right, and he was a guy. Justin and I joked about it right before the Senior Bowl because he was at the Senior Bowl, and I said, "I'm going to bet you that UCLA undersells his height because he looks so lean that I bet you he's taller than what he's listed at." And they had him listed at 6 foot, and he came in at 6'1.5",
yeah.
and he was like one at the Senior Bowl. I want to say he was like 193. I could be wrong, but the player, love him. I think he's fantastic. I think he's got great poise. I think he's got fantastic experience. He obviously he's not got all the tools, or you would be talking about a guy that would be, picked earlier. But the reality is he's accurate. He grew as a passer, especially under Chip Kelly the last couple of years. He was a guy that came in and really was expected. He was a 5-star recruit, and then he didn't take off and got there and really developed him. He's a 5th-year guy, which, again, that's, I guess, not the knock it used to be, right? Because
you're gonna have, it's gonna take a couple more years before you can really ignore the age, or not ignore.
Yeah,
the
and
age,
sorry, right. So I was looking. So yeah, he came in at 191 at the Senior Bowl.
Oh, interesting, because they had him listed on Sports Reference, 6'1", 205.
Yeah, so like I told you, they would undersell him. But yeah, so I mean, I love DTR. I think he would be a fantastic backup. He's a good fit. He's actually, he comps out well to like a PJ Walker's athletically. But he kind of, I mean, he reminds me a lot of Cole, right? Like he's lean, good arm, athletic.
He reminds me of is actually Brett Hundley.
Yeah, I think he'll be a better pro.
Yeah.
But yeah, another guy I love, again, a day 3 guy. But I love him, is Clayton Tune out of Houston. And then he came in and was a great athlete. That was what was fun, right? Came in at just under 6'3", 220 pounds, ran a 4.64 40, and then he had 37.5-inch vert and a 122-inch broad, and then ran a 6.89 3-cone, which was one of the faster times at the combine all around.
Right. That's great. I don't know why you did that as a quarterback, but
but you know who he reminds me of?
Who's that?
Josh McCown.
And he stuck around forever.
Right, and great backup, tough guy, good arm, great mobility, great athleticism. Remember, I mean, McCown was the guy dunking at all the
Well, way back when, like, the Cardinals had him starting back in like 03, 04, he was very athletic at the time.
And that's who Tune reminds me of. And so, obviously we're talking about backup Josh McCown and not starter Josh McCown. But if you got him on day 3, I think that would be a great fit because, again, you're talking about a long-term investment in the backup position. And I really do like him. I don't know enough about the guy out of Shepherd to even like have a serious conversation. Typically when those guys show up at the Senior Bowl like that, they they either play well or fizzle out. And I feel like he kind of fizzled when he was there.
Well, the Senior Bowl, like I tried to the quarterback play was subpar,
bad.
wasn't it? It was subpar at best. And I perhaps the more decorated name on here is Stetson Bennett. Only Stetson Bennett did terrible things for himself in the offseason, right, leading up to.
Yeah, has a guy ever not done anything but also hurt his draft stock more?
like he didn't do the Senior Bowl, and then what did he get? Getting arrested. Well, what was it that he did off these? I don't remember, but like leading up to it, I'm like, yeah, he was the quarterback of Georgia, but then nothing that happened in the offseason was a positive for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and so and he's like 26. I mean, he's a great athlete. I think he, the easy comp's going to be like Doug Flutie, but it makes sense, a guy that comes in, rallies the troops for a game or two, and then is back on the bench.
Public intoxication. That's what happened.
Yeah. He's an interesting fellow. I like Stetson. I mean, I think he's a funny guy, but and then Jake Hayner was the Senior Bowl, I believe, right? That had a good Senior Bowl, but he has an injury history, which is obviously a pause. He comes in, he's smaller at 6'2", 207. He and Jaron Hall are really intriguing to me, but like they're both clear backups, right? Like they're both guys that come in as backups immediately. The thing I like about Hall is that he plays with great athleticism and mobility, but his passing is it does leave something to be desired. Which I mean, why?
And also, you do have to worry about. If I recall, I don't watch a ton of BYU football, but I am aware of it. He had durability issues, right?
Yeah, so I think so, and it's one of those situations, man. Like these guys all have flaws. That's why we're talking about them in third round as a backup. But like if you had me rank like the backup guys, DTR and Clayton Tune would be 1A and 1B. Like I don't care what you put them. They're two different types of players, but like I love both of them and what they would bring as like long-term backups. And I would bring them in and then probably go Hayner, McKee, and then and then Stetson Bennett's just a wild card. Like I like him. I think he's a good player, but like, and I mean this in the most positive way. Is he interested in coming in and being a backup quarterback in the NFL? I mean, this guy has basically lived the best life for the last 5 years. Well, technically just 2 years, but 5 years while he was at BYU. Like, do you think he's going to come in and just be content to hang out on the bench and play every once in a while? So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. And with that, this actually wraps up our entire, because we're not going to talk about the specialist. That's for other people to talk about. Punters, kickers. Hey, there's the Michigan kicker, and then after that, whatever. Was it Moody? Fourth of draft pick, and who cares after that? There we just talked about the specialists. But that wraps up 4 shows of positional previews. Our next show will be next week. It'll drop on Wednesday. Seth and I will have our mock draft of the first round, and I think I think we do a decent job most years. I think this year is going to be really hard to really gauge. So our picks may be a mess. It might, with the movement there, might be at the top of the draft. But that's coming next week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise Up C-Red Podcast. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red Podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, Be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.